Hello, all. So, welcome to the. So you want to create a minis game, and honestly, who doesn't? Um, as I put in the description, I'm not at all any sort of professional miniatures game designer. I'm just someone who loves playing around with rules and tinkering with things. And I've noticed that over the years, I've done like a number of different things. And when I've talked to people who are thinking about creating minis games or even just like modifying games, and there's a lot of that in this as well. It's sort of like I realized I had like a little body of knowledge, and so that's what I decided to sort of do with this. And this, let's see if the do we have the slide up. There we go. So if we look at this picture at the bottom, I realized when I was looking at it, there is so much about this that represents that philosophy for me. So what is in this picture? This is me running a game that was a Song of Blades and Heroes game. So what is in here? So I have a custom built template that I made. I'm using miniatures from Star Wars, HeroClix, Monster Apocalypse. I've got terrain a um, from a from a pet store, self-printed terrain. This mat is something that I made myself with flannel and bleach. So basically, that's sort of cobbling all sorts of things together, and that sort of embodies the philosophy that I approach with minis games and other kinds of games in general. So I gave you the background and disclaimer. So I'll talk about why you would want to create a minis game. Like what kind of game do you want to create? How would you go about it? I'll give just like very high level an example of some existing games, but then I'll talk about some of the component types and distribution and things like that. And then I'll go into my examples, which are all works in progress. I do have some published RPG related things, but nothing actually in the miniatures area just yet. But I hope that would change. I'll talk a little bit about how to run a miniatures game night at your local game store, because I've been doing that for a while, and I think there's some lessons there. And then I'll sort of end with like sort of basically as a workshop, an open discussion. I would hope that people in the audience might have some examples that they might want to talk about, or some questions about how you could approach something, how you might actually pull something from one game into another, and I'd be happy to do that. Now, I do have to say up front also that my bias is skirmish games, and like fantastic skirmish games, usually like fantasy or science fiction. And so that's most of my examples are going to be from these kinds of games. But I feel like there's a lot that is obviously applicable across any kind of miniatures game that you would want to run. So again, so this is what we're going to talk about in this seminar. There's some various kinds of things. Creating a game from whole cloth, quantitative homebrewing. So basically how you can change elements of a game without breaking it. Frankensteining a game from your favorite mechanisms. This is a more so the first one is like a lot of people do things like that, but it's sort of how would you go about doing it and making sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't break the game. The Frankensteining is I like this from this game and I like this from this game and this game, and then you're realizing as you're pulling those things together, you're making something basically new. And then finally, the one I just added at the end because I realized I've done it a couple times lately is reskinning a game with minimal changes. This is actually, to me, super fun, and because it's like minimal changes, but you're almost like you're getting a whole new game for free. Everyone's welcome to bring ideas, to share, like put in the chat if you want. And then, as I said, I'll talk about this. And the thing about this run a semi-weekly minis game night, that is not Warhammer. That's the key, because or any of the other sort of big games like Marvel Crisis Protocol or things like that, which are ones that game stores, that's sort of very easy to get those going. Getting something running where it's like a miniatures game that's sort of on the side, like a miniatures agnostic game, that's a lot trickier, and I'm still working on it, but it's there, and like I said, I love to talk about it. So a little bit about me. I actually have both some hobby and professional side to this, which is, this will be my, this is my basically credentials. So I've done, been tabletop gamer since 1978, played all the different kinds of things, miniatures games, board games, etc. I have occasional published contributions. I run miniatures games, and I've run them at gaming conventions for 15 or more years now. Also, I've done a lot of gaming things on the professional side. I've done military training games where I've developed game mechanisms. I've done scenario development. I've built physics models for games. I do a bunch of data analysis, dashboard design, user interface design, human performance modeling, etc. All these things, and all of that stuff on the right is stuff that feeds into the hobby side, and all the stuff on the left on the hobby side feeds into the work that I do professionally. And so that's where the really interesting stuff is, when you can combine those two things that you do, two sets of knowledges. That's where things get really interesting, and that is where all of my work in doing this kind of thing to sort of make these different systems is really comes from. So why do you want to create a game? Of course, you want to create a game because you want the power to be the one who has it. But if we really sort of break it down, there's often social reasons. So it basically, you're just creating a game that you want to play. So many times you're looking oh, I like this game, but it's not quite right. Or this one, it's pretty close. This one, and so then you start to get a little bit frustrated that it's nothing is exactly what I want. Another big one is games to introduce people to minis. I've noticed that miniatures games often sort of, they're either sometimes really good, oftentimes not so good at being a game that you introduce people to. As I said, I run this game night, and it's an open game night, and people show up, and some of them have never even played any miniatures games at all. Some of them are old hats. Some of them know the game we're actually going to play. So I have a couple games that I'm oh, these are ones that are good go-to games, but there might even be better ones that you could be this is how I feel comfortable presenting a game to people. And then, sort of, there's also maybe a game for a certain type of player. Say you have a small game group of friends, and you're realizing that you want to lean in on something a certain kind of fun, either it's super crunchy fun or super thematic fun that no games out there seem to are scratching that itch at that moment. So then you can maybe be creating it for that reason. Another reason is sort of basically, create something. You want to publish a game. I want to get my name out there, or I feel I want to do this as part of something else. You may even want to try to make money on a game. I feel that's a good luck with that. I think there's a lot of people who make games and make some money on them, and that's completely fine. But I think this is usually not the get rich quick scheme. Sometimes you want to build on an existing idea. There's an IP that you like, maybe sort of Masters of the Universe, and you're I want to create my own miniatures game in the Masters of the Universe world. So that obviously you can't sell that; you just do it for yourself or whatever. You want to simplify or expand concepts in an existing game. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about space weirdos and sword weirdos, and there's these two games, and sort of they're somewhat simple, and then there's you can sort of easily expand them, or you could simplify them in certain ways, and sort of because everybody has their sweet spot for the crunch in a game. So that they might be I want to get rid of some of the things that are really, really, sort of I feel are just extra, or there's some concept that I really want, and then you want to be able to put that in. And then change genres. I talked a little bit about that. Reskinning games, you can change genres. So there's this really cool space game, but no one I know, there's some people that I want to play with that don't like space games. they love Western games. So like, can I take this system without having to learn a whole new system? There are a whole bunch of great Western games out there, but I only have so much time as well. But I'm like, is there a way that I could take a game that I have, like a Western game, and put it, a space game, and see if I could make it have enough of the game mechanisms and flavor that it feels like a Western game. So, and again, so what kind of game do you want to create? What aspects are important? So with a miniatures game, there's all sorts of things that go into it. But like when you're doing it, you might not think that there's, you might not think about all of them. So there's, so there's like, what, you know, the rules. Obviously the main thing is like, the first thing is the rules. So like, what are you doing? Like how you actually play the game. A lot of games have lore. Like if you're a Warhammer player, there is tons and tons and tons of lore. There's actually far, far, far much more lore than there is actual, you know, gameplay, because they have all these, you know, books and everything. And so that's there. Customization. So like, do you want a miniatures game where basically you have some, like a bunch of predefined things that you sort of then you select among those, or even predefined armies, and you just want them to sort of go against each other? Or do you want like detail all the way down to the eye and make changes to each individual mini? The miniatures, are you like, I have some miniatures in mind. I actually, you know, it's like not me, but like you might be someone who's like, oh, I'm you know, designing or working with some people to create these miniatures, either like in STL files or something. And it's like, these miniatures are really cool. So then like I want my game to use these miniatures. Or like you could be like, most of my preferred games are miniatures agnostic. So I'm like, okay, it's whatever minis you got. I've got minis from all over the place. I just want to be able to go to my big pile of minis, pick one and say, okay, cool, that, and then I can sort of stat it up and go from there. And then accessories, like here's some accessories that actually I made up myself for the Space Weirdos game. So like measuring templates, cards, tokens, all that sort of stuff. All these things are aspects that at some point you're going to want to think about. I talked a little bit about each of the different types: a whole cloth, own rules, own background. If you want to do your own complete set of rules and you want to do your own like custom background, you're going to probably want to do a whole cloth game. And you're also probably want to consider whether or not it's sort of a generic versus a modular game. If you're thinking, I want to create a rules system, then you're going to make it generic at first and then start adding in things to make it, you know, like lean towards one genre or one style of play or another. And those could be modules. So think about whether or not it's like, you know, you want the whole thing done at the outset, or you're creating like an engine that you want to be able to put things onto. Modification, like homebrew is the most common kind of modification. I'm just making a change. I don't like that rule. I have to change it. But a more structured way is to do some specific modifications. Like you want to add like a whole new piece that is, you know, gives you some kind of flavor that you're looking for. And then Frankensteining is really parts from here and parts from there. And what differentiates that from modification or whole cloth is, you know, you're not creating these new mechanisms. You're basically identifying mechanisms in various places, pulling them in and saying, I like this, and I'm going to put this here. I want this to be my activation system, and I want this to be my combat system, and I want this to be my character generation system. And like I said, you know, usually by that point, it's different enough that doesn't resemble any one original game, but it's not really your own rules and stuff. You're pulling it from other things. And then reskinning, minimizing. So usually what you're doing is you're minimizing mechanical changes. You're maybe like putting a couple little flavor things here and there, a couple little rule things here and there. But a lot of it is just names and flavor. And if you can get that names and flavor to feel right, you're good to go. So, so here's where we're getting to this is part of my journey of like creating a minis game. So in a sense, it's like when I was doing this, and I'm helping a friend as well who's trying to make a game. It's like, well, like I said, so what are the parts that go into the rules of it? This is basically the dissect of Plato's essential game. Some of that's what I talked about earlier, the high level pieces. But when you're at the rules, I guess maybe I should have said Plato's essential rules. You want to say, like, you want to identify the things that go into a game that make it, like a miniatures game. And then you can identify what you like and don't like in existing rules. So this is actually a spreadsheet that I have. It might be a little hard to see, obviously, because it's just like that, so small. But the idea is, if you look on the left-hand side, we have things like the game duration, game rounds, activations, initiative, the melee, how's that done? What's the melee effect? Warband composition, warband effects. And if you take a number of games that you've played, either you like or don't like them, and you start creating columns here, and you start filling that out. Like, so here I have one-page rules, Space Weirdos, Song of Blades and Heroes, even a board game, Black Rose Wars, and you start filling that out, that information, you start to get a different view into what the games, how the games are actually structured than you would just from just reading the rules as a whole, and even also playing the game. You're actually really figuring out like all the little pieces. So then you can like look through this and you're like, oh, I noticed some things, and maybe there's, give away one of my things is the, it's like, oh, look, here's morale. So almost all the games that I like sort of play and like, they have a half or less units as part of the morale. So, okay, so I do like a morale component, or I at least have a morale component like that. When you're building your game, you could be like, okay, that's a common thing to do, but maybe I don't want that. So, or look at the morale scope. So you can see here that there's like one-page rules. When there's morale effects, they're done at the individual level. So they affect each model. Or in games like Space Weirdos, the morale effect affects everybody in the warband equally. And it's sort of a persistent thing along those lines. So you start to, like say, you get that sort of sense there. Catalog existing games. This is what I'm doing here. If you do that, you can do it as much or as little as you want. I've done like about, 5 or 6 of these, and I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get a sense. The good thing about it is it keeps pointing out things that are missing. You're like, all right, oh, I just found this rule. I don't think I have that covered here. So you can go and put it in and see if the other games have it. And that sort of helps you create that catalog of things that you need to address as well. Another big thing that is big is creating game aids. This will help you in so many ways. Create a game aid for an existing game, and then of course play more games. Just keep playing games. If someone has a miniatures game, try it. It's you'll learn something from it. So here, let's talk about this. Create a game aid. This is one that I created for this game, 7TV. It's a miniatures game. It's got like, it's it's got like cards for the characters. They don't really have a ton of customization, but it is to me, it's such a neat system. And at the time, there didn't really exist a good sort of cheat sheet. I love cheat sheets for games. And what it does is it forces a deep dive into the rules in a way also that, like I say, you usually don't get when you're just reading the rules or even playing the game. Because if you're creating a cheat sheet, you need to be able to understand a concept enough to simplify it. And that's trickier than you think. You'll be like, oh, I have this idea. There's the idea that's written out. It's like a little paragraph of rules. What does that mean? How do I think about that while I'm playing the game? If you can simplify that concept and just put it in as a line, like here, like a status, spend a star to remove a status. Okay, cool. So you do that. It also forces you to be comprehensive. You want to make sure that if you're making a play aid for a game, that it covers the rules of the game. So you want to address as much as you possibly can. There is a lot of information on here. It does look better when it's printed on a page full size. But it has almost all the things that you need during gameplay. It doesn't actually have, the like warband creation and things like that, because that's not what I was going for with this. You could do that as well if you wanted to. And then finally, also a sense of organization. As you start organizing that, you realize, oh, these things fit together. These things fit together. This is sort of, there's some interplay here. And then you can sort of organize it the way that you think makes sense. And again, that may or may not be exactly how the game's presented, because many times the game is presented in a way for you to sort of learn and understand. But once you know it really well, you sort of pull back and go, oh, okay, I have it's like this is actually how you really will think about it while you're playing the game. Again, this is a great tool. You just keep, like you do this, and then you've got a sense of that game, and you in a way that is sort of nice and deep and comprehensive, and it really helps moving forward if you want to do anything on your own. So you want to figure out like what, when you're creating a game, you want to figure out what are some of the overall basic characteristics of the game itself. So there's a couple different types of games. There's like a skirmish game where you usually have like 5 to 10 figures. There's like what they call rank and flank games where you put them on, often it's like they have trays and you're doing bigger armies and there's mass movement in that. Also, I think over the past number of years, there's been a lot more of a blurring of lines between board games and miniatures games. A lot of board games have miniatures, and some of them sort of play like miniatures games, but they're usually obviously a lot more formalized. And usually board games, you're just sort of, in a sense, playing, like the rules are much stricter and more formal, and they usually provide a lot more to the game. Like they'll provide the minis, they'll provide the board, they'll provide the dice, they'll provide all the things that you need, to play the game. So another thing is that overall style. So are you thinking primarily like a melee game, like an old fantasy game, or like monsters fighting each other kind of thing, or a ranged game, or in a sense both? So a lot of space games really heavily lean on range combat, and sometimes melee is sort of an afterthought. A really good example of this is Boot Hill, the old TSR game. Was pretty much like all about range combat, and then it was like, oh yeah, and we have some stuff in here for fighting as well. So because the original Boot Hill was really basically a miniatures game, but it was a miniatures game about shooting at each other, and then they realized they had to put in some melee stuff and then add that on. Is it sort of human centered? Like, is it so basically it's just sort of human sized in a sense, or even just specifically humans that are in the game. If you're doing a historical game, that's actually that's not 100% true. Like historical game has humans, but one thing to look at with something like a historical game or fantasy games or whatever is look at the scale that you're comfortable with within the minis. So you just want everything to be basically the same size. So all the figures are basically it's this versus this versus this, or you're going to allow different size things. Like in a historical game, will you allow in the same game infantry and tanks to interact? And that has its own whole set of implications that are different than if you just have the same size units and interactions with each other. Genre, there's all sorts of genres to go with. I think probably maybe if you're in this group today, probably a lot of you probably lean towards the historical or the generic, but there's obviously all sorts of things. And again, you could go generic at first, and then as you're doing it, you can start to realize, oh, I really want it to be one or the other. Or you could always just be like, I want to make this the generic one, and then I'll make a historical module, or I'll make a fantasy module, and things like that. And then finally, because we're talking about these miniatures games, it's also important to think that there are these, that there's scales. For me, I always lean towards the sort of the 25 to 40 millimeter scale, which is usually like the people size scale. But then I realized, of course, yes, there's other scales as well. Like 15 millimeter scale is often done when you have like people and vehicles that are a little smaller. 10 millimeter, you're doing like bigger armies. And then if you're going into even larger, like 1 to 600 or 1 to 1200, you're doing like ocean level, naval, or spaceship level. So, you know, that's part of the process as well. Is you may know it off the top of you may know exactly what you want to do, but think about it. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's right. I'm making a 25 millimeter game, and so that's what, you know, I sort of want to build around that. So on the component types, these are the things to think about. Like, again, rules, minis, any accessories. Stat blocks. Are stat blocks sort of more generic, or like, is it just sort of a list, or do you envision like cool cards that sort of have all the stat information? Digital aids, like this that's shown at the bottom here is the one-page rules. They have a builder for the war bands, and then so then you can like sort of print it out and or like look at it and keep it on your phone, and then so it creates the war bands for you. Is it a game that you want to be primarily a physical in-person game, or are you interested in seeing how you can translate the rules to digital tabletop, like spacing on the names of some of the you know well-known tabletop game setups. When if you're thinking about going to like commercially releasing it, with the rules and accessories, you want to think about, oh, do I want to do like create like a book, or do I want to create minis, or do I want to create the accessories, have physical versions of those, or is it all just virtual, or is it print on demand or something like that? So again, that part is maybe not necessary as much if you're thinking, that you're just doing it for yourself. But it's always good to sort of keep that in mind if there is a future that's like, what, what would I do if I wanted to go a step further and I wanted to sort of try to release this and try and get it out there. All right, so this is just a laundry list of existing mini games, and I'll just talk a little bit about each one. I'm not going to go into these in any detail, but it sort of shows the categories, and it sort of shows a little bit about sort of the insight into my thinking about it too. So you've got like these full physical miniature games, the ones like Warhammer, Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars X-Wing. These are games where there's like, it's giving you the full experience. Absolutely everything that you need is basically there, and you can sort of buy it as is. It has all the parts you need. You read the rules, you'll be able to play and things like that. And these games they're usually big, and they're sort of like, in a sense, well supported, and there's a lot to doing and creating those kind of things. I talked a little bit about the board games. So here's a couple examples of board games that have like a miniatures game component to it. Black Rose Wars is a game where you're these mages that are going around sort of, fighting each other in this place, this Black Rose mansion. Mansions of Madness. You have your characters, you have abilities, you're moving around the map as it gets built out based on the scenario, and you're fighting the various monsters that come in. Kingdom Death Monster or Gloomhaven as well. I could have put that one on there. Big ones where there's very scenario driven, very like specific sort of events and stories, and you interact with them that way. Some of these games like that, and like Hellboy is another one. And this one, probably Hellboy is probably one of the ones that really straddles that that miniatures game versus a board game. It comes with the boards, all the little board pieces, has a number of scenarios, has the minis for those scenarios, and you could play the entire thing, and you could just follow the scenarios and be like, okay, cool, I'm just going to go through all the various missions and do it that way. Great fun missions. But they also have these they have like this expansion set, which is like a bunch of extra cards to make it so that you can create all your own scenarios however you want with the the board pieces that are out there. The rules actually sort of tell you how to use the different style board pieces so that you can create your own. And so it starts to lean into that more open-ended gameplay that you'd be wanting to do. An interesting company that has sort of come up in the minis game world over the past number of years is Osprey. They have a number of series and games that I really enjoy. They have a ton of minis games, but I'm just going to point out 3 of them here that are the fairly big ones. 2 of them because they're sort of series games. Like there's this Rampant series. There's Lion Rampant, which is a historical sort of medieval game. Dragon Rampant, which is sort of a fantasy, which sort of builds on that. Xenos Rampant, which is the space version. Frostgrave and Stargrave, they sort of harken back to the old like Mordheim style game from Games Workshop. Gaslands is completely different. It is a game where you are basically, it's like a Mad Max style game. You're getting your cars. You could take them. Basically, the expected scale is like Matchbox cars. You could glue like weapons to them and things like that. And then the rules are for playing that. It's sort of, so it's like a really, and the Osprey presentation is really, really nice. So if you have an opportunity to get an Osprey game, to look at how they actually, like sort of do the layout and present their games, that's actually a really good thing. And then there's a ton of independent games. I'm just going to point out some of the ones that I think are interesting, and like Trench Crusade is new and hot right now. They just did Kickstarter for it, and it's made a ton of money, and it's pulling in a lot of people that are interested in Warhammer. Space Weirdos, super simple game. To me, it's honestly, I feel like Space Weirdos is almost like a perfect game. It's like 16 pages long. You can jump in, you can create these really neat interactions in your war bands and everything. And so it like scratches a lot of itches for me. 7TV, I talked a little bit about. It has specific cards, a little more complex rules. The conceit of the game is one of my favorite things. It's like you're not actually doing regular just sort of scenarios. You're doing episodes of TV shows back in the like 60s and 70s British television. And so a lot of the game mechanisms relate to that kind of thinking. You have like scenes, first scene, second scene, third scene, and you have like the MacGuffin, the thing that they're going for, and gadgets, and they're like the cast. The war band is called the cast, and all that sort of thing. One Page Rules is a big. It's grown up over the years. It was like originally just a one-page distillation of rules that are similar to Warhammer, and it has grown over the years. It is now they have multiple systems. They have it for like skirmish and full-on battle, and then like large-scale battle, and then they have it for fantasy and science fiction, and they have like war fleets, which is spaceship battles, and then they've even gone into, now they're creating their own miniatures, so you can actually go on there. You can either get them directly or go on Patreon and become a member and get their things. So I think One Page Rules, if you want to learn about the evolution of a game company, you can start looking at One Page Rules and when they, how they started out and how they've sort of built up over the years. I think it's really neat. Song of Blades and Heroes, I always have to mention. It's the one I always have always used to demonstrate games to people. It's got a ton of variations. Some of you may have heard of Song of Drums and Chacos, which is a Napoleonic version. Years ago, I actually ran a virtual version of that in one of these game sessions. It's great. I feel like there's a little element of it is maybe it's showing its age a little bit, and it's going to be one of the examples that I talk about with like making some changes. Another fun thing to look at is Snarling Badger Studios. If you're um, this will be a nice little sidebar to talk about like YouTube for a minute. So there's a guy that I really like, Tabletop Minions, um, 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 Adam Loper, I think, and Vince Ventrella. They made this Snarling Badger Studios, and so Adam has this thing, Tabletop Minions. He's had a YouTube channel for like 10 years, and it's like I really enjoy it. It's about minis, and he has with Vince Ventrella made a couple of games over the past couple of years, some slightly more comprehensive games. They have like do a zine where they do like a little tiny game. That's another one to look at the sort of the breadth of games. And then also what's interesting is if you look at the games, they don't fall back on the same style. They really lean into the theme driving the rules. So it's a really good example of these are the same two people making these games, but they're all really different because they have more, they're not taking a generic approach. They're taking a theme first approach, and usually they're really quite different. Obviously, I don't need to mention it here. You can go on YouTube and you can learn about all sorts of things with game design. And, there's tons of information out there, and there's a lot of it that's really relevant. I even say probably most of it is good, but is it relevant for you, and is it going to work for you? And try really hard to avoid the rabbit hole of just being like, I'm going to look at this one. 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 Start doing just, to me, the more you get hands-on and start doing things yourself, like making those lists, making those game aids, that's going to be the thing that's going to give you the most value. And you can go back and you can go like, doing some rules with this. Then you can go look up some YouTube videos. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of my examples. They're all works in progress. They in varying degrees. Actually, some of them are a little more complete than others. But anyway, so now we'll sort of dive in. So there's this first thing, which is this want to use. I want to use some certain mechanisms that I've seen in other games because I just think they are so cool. The first one is, and this is part of like when you're, like I said, when you're doing it too, when you're thinking about like a big part of it is the resolution mechanism. Is it like you roll opposed die? Do you roll a number against a target number? How much are you adding or subtracting to with bonuses and things like that? What is the distribution curve? Is it flat like a D20? Is it a bell curve like a 3D6? Here's one just to throw this out to just sort of get people thinking about that there are really cool different ways of doing things. This is from the Hobbit board game from Iron Crown Enterprises back years ago. They give you 3 dice. Each of the dice has a 1, 2, and a 3, and the pips 1, 2, and 3. What you do when you roll those dice, you add up the numbers and you add up the pips, and you take the difference between the two of them, and it's basically it's always going to be a positive number. So you take always the greater, and you subtract the lesser. This sounds really sort of like, okay, it's just a mechanism. But what that does, and I meant to put it on here and I forgot, was that you get a curve, a resolution curve that gives you basically an average of like 1.2, but it runs from 0 to 9. So it is an asymmetrical long tail distribution. And what's really neat is that often like that's actually the way a lot of people do things in real life. It's a very asymmetrical distribution. You could have like no effect, 0 to sort of some effect, and then you have the option to do something like maybe great. So the way that would happen is if you rolled like a like a 1 and a 2 on the numbers, and then a 3 on the pips, that's a 0. If you rolled a 3, and a 3, that's a 9. So that to me is just like that. Again, thinking about different resolution mechanisms in a little bit of detail starts to get you to think of like, wow, this is really cool. There's some fun things I could do here. Another game I want to pull some stuff from is this game called Ragnarok Age of Wolves. It's from Skirmisher Games. I like the game, but the basic mechanisms don't feel different enough to me to warrant playing it. Because getting older, so I like to there's only so much effort I have to put into learning all these new games. So the game mechanisms, they're fine. There's actually nothing wrong with them. If it was the first game you picked up, I think it would be a fine game to sort of pick that up, learn the rules. It has a lot of things that are done in a very straightforward way. But it's got two really cool concepts that sort of add on to the game. They have this what is called this weird die. So your heroes roll this what is called a weird die. It's an extra D6, and it has combination of both positive and negative effects. Like if the number on the weird die equals one of the numbers that you rolled, then you get some sort of effect based on that number right there. If it's really low, it's bad. If it's high, it's good. And it's like, that's a really neat mechanism. And they also have this runes thing, which is a way that like runes get cast at the beginning of the game to determine a lot of like fate things. So it's sort of like effects that occur throughout the game. So maybe like you cast a rune and it's like all of your guys are have an extra point of movement or something like that. I can't remember the details, but like look for thematic concepts that are in other games and see if you can apply them either directly as is or just take that concept and put it into the game. Initiative system. Veritwood has like a bag initiative system, which is really cool, where you put in like the little chits into a bag. There's a number of games that do this, but I have not yet figured out. I've not yet put that into any of my games. So I want to try seeing that because it really is something like a bag initiative system changes the way that you approach how you're going to use your figures. Because if it's like an I go, you go, I move all my guys and do all my things with them. You go into that with a certain philosophy of how you're going to do things. A simple back and forth. I activate one, you activate one, I activate. But if it's our choice, then you can see that there's it's a way to sort of you understand how you're going to go into the system that way. But if it's something random like a bag initiative system where it's like, oh, you pull out something that says that you can move this kind of figure, you don't know if that's okay. Oh, I wasn't expecting to move him now, or maybe the enemy gets to pull 2 or 3 in a row, and it's sort of surprising, and you're like, you have to rethink how you do things. And then interactions. Malifaux has a card system, and I love cards, so I'm always trying to figure out ways to incorporate card systems into a game. So this is one of my games that I'm currently working on, and I'm calling it my super simple war game because I want it to be, so with mine is that I want it to be like an engine. I want it to be a really simple engine. And some of the things that I was, yes, I agree. Yep. That's, that is an excellent point. Thank you. So the yes, do it. And and at the end, if you have some ideas and you want to talk about them, post them in the chat, and we can talk about that a little more too. So anyway, so the super simple war game, the influences, and they're very, very broad influences. They're not really direct influences, but I play a ton of Savage Worlds RPG. And so that often, like the things about that, and like it's a polyhedral system, so that's probably where that polyhedral part came in. commands and colors. I love the commands and colors um, system, the ancients and even and like Memoir 44 and all that. And I like that. And so I was part of me thinking that. And then Wizard Kings, which is interesting because it's a game that I can't remember exactly how much came from Wizard Kings, but I know when I was looking at the rules for Wizard Kings, which I didn't ultimately like that much overall, somehow it just kept driving me to think about like making my own. And so that's part of what this was. And so then my sort of top level design goals are, it's like you have limited unit types so that all the units are there down at the bottom. I have right now, that's the limited unit types. I use the polyhedral dice. I love polyhedrals, so that's my thing. I'm going to use them when I can, and then make it easy math. And so the way that this game basically works is you come at you have like a versus normal. So you're say like you have the one guy that's like it's really probably a little hard to see. But you have like a mounted guy. There's a +1 versus normal, and he's fighting a normal guy. So if he's attacking a normal, he's going to be at +1, and then if he's also he's been energized by one of his by his leader, so then he has a +2. So then you just look over here. Look how he was a +2. Then you just roll a polyhedral and you get a d12. If you get a 4 or greater on the d12, then you succeed and you can kill him. So this is just like the very beginnings of like an engine, but you can see that there's a number of things in here. There's the resolution mechanism. I also like to try to understand all the odds, so I'm not doing something really wonky. You've got some effects like battle conditions and terrain effects, and you can expand those as much or as little. Here's the basics of a figure. You say you have like how many hits it has, how much it can move, what's its basically to hit ability, and then whether it has a special ability. And then for mine, again, because it's super simple, I basically created a formula that generates the cost based on all of these. So then I have this sort of special abilities examples, which are like, you could energize adjacent allies. You can attack an enemy up to three spaces away. And so like basically special rules is a big part of minis games. And so like, but some things like a lot of those ones here, they don't have special rules. They just have the basics, the hits, the move to hit. And then, but then if there are special rules, you can sort of pull them in that way. So again, this is like, it's almost like it's just a simple like proto war game. So now what I'm going to talk a little bit about are some of the various modifications I've made on games. Talk a little bit about Song of Blades and Heroes. This is a game that I have played for 15 or more years. I actually think it is really, really balanced, and they have it's got a great system. The activation system is incredibly unique, but it causes a lot of problems. There's a lot of people don't like it. They either feel it's too arbitrary, or basically if the system's against them. It's always, like many times people on both sides feel like they are really, really losing. And it's like, well, that's fine. And it's a fair game. But I almost like you almost wish that people were thinking that they were doing better throughout. And part of it is the activation system is you activate models one at a time. You could activate absolutely everything in your warband on your turn, but there's a mechanism to prevent you from doing that. And the way that works is you have a figure. You say, I'm going to activate it, and you're going to roll against your quality. So you have your choice of rolling 1, 2, or 3 dice. You roll for each success that you get. That's an action you can take, like attacking somebody, moving, interacting with something. Well, obviously, why wouldn't you want to roll 3 or more all the time? Well, if you roll 2 or more failures, your entire turn is done, and it's called a turnover. So it then goes over to the other player, and then they have their turn. So there's multiple options. One is that you don't get to activate any figures at all. You've decided to roll 3 dice on your first guy and you roll a turnover. Immediately goes over to the other guy. You decide to be safe and roll 1 die for each guy. You're not getting a lot done, but you get to activate everybody. You roll 2 or 3 dice. Another one is you roll 2 or 3 dice. Sometimes you're getting like 1 success, 1 failure with the 2 dice. Sometimes you're getting 2 successes. You're rolling the 2 dice or 3 dice. If you get 3 failures, okay, then you're done. So you can probably maybe get like half your warband. A lot of people feel that's way, way, way too arbitrary. So part of it is thinking is like, I want to think about a mechanism like how can I play the game in a similar way that uses that same piece, that 1, 2, 3 activations. To me, that's one of the key decision-making points. If you can identify those key decision-making points in a game, that's a really positive, good thing. How can I preserve some of that, but try to make it feel more fair? So then I started writing up a bunch of like options for the game. Oh, another one is the combat sometimes feels a little arbitrary because you roll a d6 and you add their combat level and you compare it, and so it sometimes can feel a little swingy and things like that. But like, okay, so here's an example of how I might change the Song of Blades of Heroes activation system. So if we change the activation procedure, and this is just throwing it out there. It's like 1 action. If you say you're going to do 1 action, you don't roll. You just can do it. If you do 2 activation, you could be like, oh, I'm going to do a normal roll but get no turnovers. And with 3 activation, either you could say you do it with a -1 quality, or you could do that with normal turnovers. So like you only risk a turnover if you're doing 3. So it puts a little more of that agency and a little bit less capriciousness in there. I'm going to risk going out because I want to do 3 things. Or like I want to do potentially 2 things. I'm happy with doing nothing if I didn't get the 2. Not happy, but like I accept that I can get nothing with the 2. Like that right there, that little block, that very first part in that short list, that right there, it preserves the activation system, that decision-making in the activation system, but it is actually uses it in a, it's handled in a different way. Now, when you look, we're looking at this, I realize, of course, there's going to be consequences. One of the consequences is, oh, well, actually, probably most of the time they're going to get to activate their whole army. So maybe at this point, once you've done this, maybe there's a limit. You could put like, well, you nominate a figure and everybody within 12 inches of that could potentially activate. And so you start to realize that there might be consequences to the way that you've constructed a rule. And then you want to sort of figure out how that works. And of course, always this is the unspoken thing about any of these kind of rules. The best way to address them is to play test it. So you can then start to see that and play test it with different people as much as possible, because your groups, no matter what you think of how much they're like, oh, I'm going to try to break the game and all that, they're usually going to try to break it in very specific ways. You get other people, they're going to try to break it in different ways. So you want to get your game broken as much as possible in as many different ways from as many different viewpoints as possible. Savage Worlds, it's a role-playing game. It was born out of a miniatures game, The Great Rail Wars, and they have their own version of a skirmish game called Showdown. But I wasn't really happy with Showdown because I felt it was too similar to the regular Savage Worlds. And I wanted to actually sort of simplify it. So I wanted to do 2 things with it. I wanted to make like a skirmish system that was easier to play. And I also wanted to scale it, because sometimes you're thinking like you want to do some things with armies and stuff like that. So here's what I did. So I approach a streamline the existing set. So if you know anything about, Savage Worlds or a lot of RPGs, you'll have like attributes and skills. And oftentimes, you sort of assign points, or you like randomly roll for the attributes, and you do them for the skills, and they may or may interact a little bit, but basically you're doing all this sort of assignment aspect. Well, to me, that's a little too much for a skirmish game. So I feel like, okay, if I then went back and said, okay, we just look at the attributes, and then a skill is simply a straight up modifier to the attribute. It uses the same names that Savage Worlds does, like athletics and stealth and heal and things like that. But it's basically you're doing the same effect. You're rolling a die, a polyhedral die, to get that effect, but it's done in a much simpler fashion. The representation of a figure is so much simpler than a full on. Yes, anything's better than plain I go, you go. So you're getting those, you're getting that feel of, in a sense, playing Savage Worlds, but with a much simpler system. And then the other part is the scale, which is actually right there at the bottom. So then it was trying to be like, okay, so can I incorporate a system where I can do different scales? And so, like, basically that little table at the bottom right there shows sort of like something I'm working on with, like, oh, these are modifiers. Say if you had a company level attacking a platoon level, they'd get like a +1 to it, and that sort of 3 is like the number there is the number of figures in there when you so say you have a scale, like you've chosen, I want my game to be played at sort of company scale. I have 3 figures in it. If I have a platoon, it's going to be 2 figures, and then the difference between those two is like a bonus or a subtraction. And there's other things like bennies and rerolls and stuff like that. So that's a way to sort of take something. And that one I played a couple of games of that. It seems to work really well. It takes too long, so I gotta do something to pull back on that. But that one actually, even though it sounds sort of way out there, it's one of the ones that actually is working pretty well. So if you have some weird idea like that, like, could I do something that could span like platoon to core level? Could I do something? Yeah, give it a shot. You're not gonna it's not gonna it may be broken, or it may actually, you may surprise yourself and you got something that actually works really well. Space Weirdos, this is one, it's a reskin. This is one of the ones that's really fun. I just did this one, which is why I wanted to it was on the front of my mind. I run this minis game night at a local game store, and there's this guy who wants to play Western games, and he's like, I'll play any of these games. And I'm like, I don't know any of those games. I'm like, can you run them? And he said, no, I don't know how to run them. I was like, okay, so what do we do here? Do I go buy these games and learn them so I can run them for him if I don't like them, or try to make him do it? Instead, what I just decided I was going to take, actually reskin a game that exists, Space Weirdos, to a Western. And all I'm really doing is changing names. So like on the left is the Space Weirdos. It's like their special abilities. Cybernetics, they get a +1 to prowess rolls. Well, that sounds like a brute. I could do that. It's like, oh, name it brute. Healing, which is like when you heal a med kit, you model touching this model becomes ready. Well, and sort of, if you're doing sort of a classic Western, that might be whiskey. You just give someone a bottle of whiskey, and then they sort of shake themselves out of being sort of stunned. So that right there, it's immensely satisfying to do that, and really fun if you can translate. And then again, in the process of design, you'd be like, something doesn't quite fit. Like in the Space Weirdos, I couldn't quite figure out how to make the rocket launcher translate very well to Western. Maybe a Gatling gun, but still, I was just like, so I'll just leave that one out. But that's part of the fun thing that you can do with that. How do you distribute their games? I don't really know a whole lot about this because I haven't really done it, but I do know of other people that do the way they do things is like sometimes he'll even sell it and then give you access to a Google Drive or a Dropbox or free. You can just go there and get it. That's super simple. If you want to put it onto a site, like create a PDF and put it on a site, itch.io, Gumroad, Wargame Vault, those are all places that sell PDFs of games. If you want to do a print game, you could do something like Lulu. Wargame Vault also does print on demand. But if you want to go big and you can go larger venues, you can try talking to a company like Osprey and seeing if they're interested in your game. I don't know that process. Or you can try to do it on something like Kickstarter or GameFound. Again, those are much more bigger like outlays of investment of time and cash and effort and all that sort of stuff. So if you want to go that route, you can go that route, but there's many other ways that you can do that on the left that don't require that level of involvement. All right, so I'm going to end on the quote official part with the how to run a minis game at your local friendly local game store. So first thing is I'm sort of blessed. I have a number of game stores that are all within like a 20-minute drive of my house. There's probably like 4 or 5 of them, something like that. But I went to the one that I normally go to, and then I talked to them, and they no, we can't. There's no like time you can do that regularly. And I went to another one, and like, nope, no. Well, you could do it this night, but we're also doing something else. And I'm like, okay, so you want to find an available time. It's harder than you think. Once you do, though, if you do find something, you're like, you can then ask to talk to the owner and be like, this is what I want to do. In my case, it's called Magnet. It's the Miniatures Agnostic Game Night every Tuesday, because Tuesdays are a night that you don't normally get a lot of things going on. You don't have your RPGs as much. You don't have your Warhammer, don't have your Magic, all that sort of stuff. It's usually a night that doesn't really, not much happens. So I created this idea, and I went and talked to this game store near us, the Heart of Gold Games. It's in Longmont, Colorado. It's a great place. And then, what was really neat was over time, they were like, okay, well, we officially close at 7, but if you come, we won't kick you out. Obviously, we won't kick you out until 9. Over time, I kept doing it, and then other people got interested in that time, at least that time period, not necessarily my game group, but that time period. And so now they've extended it. So now they're actually open late those times as well. So it's sort of, there's some, you want to work with the store to be able to make it a mutually beneficial thing. And then how do you get more information on it? You get on their in-store calendar. They have a board. Like get the game up on the board so that when someone's checking out and they can go, what's that? Get on their online calendar so that you can see, oh, this thing is going on. People may just show up. Their Discord, I have my own channel on their Discord site where we do talk about Magnet, what games we're going to play, things like that. Set up a regular time. I wish I could do it every week. I can't really do it every week. So right now it's every other week. And that's okay, because especially one of the weeks on the first Tuesday of the month, they do this big magic swap, which is this incredibly loud, noisy thing. So I wouldn't want to be running a miniatures game during that time anyway, but the other Tuesdays are available. This is important. Show up even when no one else does, because if you've no interest, and it's just like, okay, well, do I just show up? If you keep not showing up, then no one's going to show up. If you go, then you can just be there, set something up. People come in, to the store. The store employees know this. They'll be like, oh, go over and talk to this person if you're interested, or, so you basically make it a little bit of a commitment. It's slow. It's hard. It doesn't, mine still is not, it's not massive. I usually get like 4 or 5 people, but actually that's fine. And always be, be welcoming. Like this might be harder than, it's like, I have to say this, but some people, they're just like, they set it up and they just sort of sit there, like just like be welcoming, willing to talk to people. An important thing is have everything needed. Make it so that when people just show up, you've got it all there. I've got my rules. I've got my minis. You can take this warband as is and just jump in, or like do that so that you can get people in there right away. And always be positive, even if they're like, this game stinks, whatever. You're just like, okay, fine. This maybe is not the game for you, but be positive. And then it makes it, just makes it more enjoyable for all. I think doing something like this, it's a great venue for you when you're making a game, trying out game mods or whatever. If you get like a little core group of people, they're going to be really accommodating. They're going to be like, you'll be like, oh, I want to try out this thing. I want to try out this Western minis. So, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. With the next session, we're going to do that. We're going to try out your Western weirdos, and so it's a nice outlet, and it gives you those two things. It gives you multiple things. It gives you that accountability. It gives you the exposure to different people, not just your friends. It gives you opportunities to play. It's a very nice symbiotic relationship trying to get running a game at a game store and designing a game. All right, so that actually, and I'm going to read the adapt the skirmish system to an existing board game. To an existing board game. Well, in an odd way, there's something somewhat similar that I did. I don't know if this is going to address your question exactly, but we were doing a sort of a campaign, like a space campaign system where we had like this star map and we're moving around. And so there was 3 different levels to it. So like when you're doing the space thing, you're moving around to from one star system to another. And then when you would clash with somebody, we used the Starfire rules. So you had your spaceships that way. But then when they would then go down to the planet and then have a fight on the planet, we would use the ogre rules. And then if you had like some individual fighting, then you could use your actual like any sort of RPG kind of rules or something like that. That's what we did. Now, as to your question, what you could do is do a little bit of that stuff that I talked about with the Savage Worlds one. If in the board game there's some specific characteristics, and they might even be only qualitative characteristics, they might just be like flavor text. It's really cool if you could take flavor text and figure out ways to translate that into a game mechanism off to the side. That'd be a really cool thing to do. And I know there was a second question there and I sort of missed that. There we go. Regarding stores, aspect, and setting up games. Oh, optimal playtime. Okay. So we usually run it from, I usually run it or have the space available from 6 to 9. The store officially closes at like 9:30. So I officially make it end about a half an hour early. The games usually don't always run to 9. But sometimes they do because people show up like around 6:30. So I think like a 2.5 to 3 hour block is really good, because especially if you're trying to get people to play the game, like, all right, so say I'm running a game, 3 people show up, they've never played the game before at all. I need to explain sort of in a sense the high level what the game's about. I need to ask them sort of like, I could just hand them warbands, but I'm like, what do you want to do? Like, oh, then this warband is sort of what might interest you. So you have to like distribute the warbands, You need to talk about the sort of the basics of what their warband can do. These guys are really ranged, and then this guy's a stealth. This is one where you're a controller. You actually have the ability to kill off your own guys to boost others, and like this thing's special about that. And then you do like usually like a round or two of just like a let's start playing, and the the first couple rounds are really tough because everyone's like, wait, what do I do here and here? So those things all take like those things will at least take usually about like at least an hour, and then you'll get like a an hour of a little more sort of comfortable regular play. And then like I said, usually um, um, when it's done, then you can be like, oh, so are you interested? You want to come again? You're like, this is what it takes to build. Like, you can look at some of the other things, like building. How do you build a war band at the end, where it's like, yeah, this is really cool. I'm like, yeah, and you see here, you've got this. It's a point system, and you can take your leader and your leader abilities, and see how I picked the leader ability and the war band ability. They mesh together, and that's why your war band did what it did. So that's the I'm going to actually stop now until we can get a little bigger. But that's the that's sort of one of the things you can do to close is see if they're still interested, give them a little more information, and go from there. Are there any other questions that I missed, or comments? Says the something very similar. What was what part was similar to what I was talking about?
Mark, that was the issue of tying together the different echelons, where you guys would use Starfire for one part of it.
Oh, okay, got it.
Fazza had the Renegade Legion series that had Interceptor, and I don't remember all the names, but they had the ground combat game. They had the space dogfighting game. They had the macro level sort of campaign game. Battletech's done much the same thing. You can do battle troops to do the big engagements. You can play the original Battletech game for the mech to mech combat. There's the Aerotech game that lets you play the aerial battle before the drop onto the planet. So there's a bunch of different options that let you mix and match those.
Very neat.
So I'm going backstage again.
Okay. So I also have examples. I could show like a little bit bigger versions of some of the things. So adapting a system is changing the game's settings. I'm trying to. I'll answer what I think you're saying, and then you can correct me if I got it wrong. Yes, it's the one of my philosophies is always about like player agency, giving them lots of decisions to be able to make and have those decisions be meaningful. Try to incentivize doing sort of cool and interesting things. So if the best thing to do in your game is to just run up and hit somebody, then that's what they're going to do, and you're going to be a little, you're going to have that be the main thing. But if you have sort of the cool special things, or especially if there's ways to incorporate sort of a symbiosis among your figures, and like if I go near this guy, he gives a bonus this way, and like to give incentivize the players to figure out cool and interesting ways to have their minis do things, then yes, then I say definitely I like that. That's what I want to see, and that's what I want to do in a game. So does that answer the question? And there I have some more, I could show with us like a higher resolution if there was anything that I brought up that anyone would want to see a little more of. You can just ask. And does anybody have any other like design mechanism questions that, or even an example of one that you're working on, one that you're doing, or even just post in the chat. Like I with the audience currently, are you primarily like war game, like historical, fantasy? Are you interested in any of the genres? Is it the flexibility of building up war bands that gets you interested in minis games, or is it the sort of the being able to create a space? Those are like some of the things that are like what brought you to this presentation? Unless there's nobody there, I don't know. Historical, okay. So what's interesting is I actually really liked the old Games Workshop historical series. I like the old Western one. I played the Roman one once. I actually thought they were really pretty fun. They're a little more effort than I want to do right now because I'm not as big of a fan of the roll to hit, roll to see if you damage, then you can try to stop the like I like my systems a little bit different now, but I actually really liked those rule sets. And then there's obviously the like the Wings of Glory and things like that, which are also fun. I really enjoyed that World War One Wings of Glory game. And well, if you're so when you say you're a board war gamer, is that more like the like Commands and Colors and like like the GMT games and things like that? I feel like there's a way, like I say, you can pull things from it. I was always intrigued by the system with Commands and Colors of being able to make generic armies. So coming up with a point system for the armies so that you could then say, well, I want to create my own Roman army to go against this barbarian army. And I just want to play out a scenario like that without having to do the system as it is. So the historical perspective, I know that I'm always the least educated in the room when it comes to any historical event. So, and if I for me, if I were going to try to make a truly historical game, one that was not, say, more like a cinematic one, Westerns are a good example of that. You could try to be like, I want to make a Western game, but I want it to try to be more realistic. Like if I want to try to do like the gunfight at the Old K Corral where everybody missed each other for like rounds and rounds and rounds, and then finally something happened, versus the cinematic Sergio Leone, that's its own thing. But like, I don't feel like I have enough of a historical knowledge of almost any area to really to do that. But so my favorite cards or dice. I'm a dice guy, but I like cards a lot too. I have a bunch of different decks of cards, but I don't have too many where the cards are actually that much different than than just regular playing cards. The one game 7TV that I mentioned, they have cards that are all the characters, and normally I'm not a fan of that, but I really like that one because they have so many of them, and there's so many different genres, and they have the cards, and it's just easy to print them out. And also, it's a little hard to reverse engineer their system because it's basically like it's only like 1, 2, or 3 overall points for something, but there's a lot going on. So it's been hard to try to reverse engineer it to try to come up with my own. I'll just use theirs. Yeah, hard to acknowledge tribes of hex encounter means. So you see, I've played like all sorts of games, like I said, I started with D&D and Ogre and the Fantasy Trip, and sort of just like played a whole bunch of different kinds of games over the years. I'm trying to think if there's sort of so Black Rose Wars is one that almost combines sort of miniatures with a board game aspect that is that is like a deck building. Black Rose Wars has like your miniatures. You're moving around. You're bringing in your summoning your creatures, and you're doing things, and you're interacting and fighting the other guys and all that sort of stuff. And then there's this deck building aspect where you're each round you're sort of building up your spells and things like that. It's one of the reasons why I like that so much is that it's got that sort of two different aspects: a classic board game aspect of deck building, and then also the sort of the miniatures aspect as well. So I think usually it is easier to just jump among a similar system. So a good example is like the Song of Blades and Heroes stuff. So I'll run straight up fantasy Song of Blades and Heroes. There's the Song of Drums and Chacos, which is their Napoleonic one. That one I can, sort of get that, like basically the main core is the same. There are some differences in there, but sort of that understanding of how people are built, what you can do, how movement goes, all that sort of stuff is the same. They have like another one from that, which is like Mighty Monsters and Super Samurai or something like that, which is like a wholly different kind of game. It's got like, you just have one guy, he's got like multiple levels and things, but the basic mechanic is still the same. You're rolling the 3 dice, you're having an effect, you buy points. And that's actually pretty easy for people to get into who've been exposed to Song of Blades and Heroes. It's, because if you have that understanding of the core mechanism and the way that things go back and forth, that's a lot easier than learning a whole new system. Socioeconomic structures. So I'll throw something out. It may or may not be what you're interested in. Is that part that I talked about with that Ragnarok, where it has the quote runes? One thing you could do is you could almost make like a sort of game before the game where you do some things to try to influence the current, like the current political climate, the current social climate. You could do some things to try to, influence that beforehand, and then those things as they're done, like maybe the socioeconomic is that it's very trade free at this point. So it means that you could actually take pieces or components from different kingdoms and add them or whatever, and then be like, that's something that you could do. And if that's something you wanted to do in that early stage, you could try to sort of, influence that so that you could create, in a sense, what you wanted. Or if you're following something very historical, that same thing could happen. It could be like, we're going to do a campaign, and it's going to be this time period, this not time period, but this and this and this, and you have that socioeconomic or political thing, which basically provides a campaign rule. One thing that I like a lot in minis games is when there's sort of a before and after. So many times, like I do some games where I have like it's like a Fear and Faith, which is a Song of Blades and Heroes variant, but it like takes place at night, and they have rules for starting the game, like whether or not you starts at night and then goes into today, or vice versa. And so like over a period of time, it could be like, you could say the scenario is, all right, you roll a d6 every time. So at the first round, it would only be, it would only go to night on a 6, and then the next round it would go on a 5 or 6, and so like you don't know when it's going to appear exactly, but then when it does appear, there's some extra effect that, oh, now it's hard to see, so shooting is more difficult and the vampires get more powerful, something like that. So you can, those are two different ways that I could easily see to incorporate some of these other historical things. So you have your game engine, and then your this socio-political climate for this encounter that you want to look at. You got, yeah. So so with the like the card system, there's like a couple of different ways of like how you would do a card system. Is it basically that you have a pool of cards that you can always choose from and play out those for a turn, or is it that you have like a random set and you sort of can use those? They're gonna, like cards are sort of interesting because cards can be a little more of a deterrent against randomness. So if you have like a fixed set of cards and you do things with those cards, that's you're sort of bounded by that. Especially if you're not like working off of a hand. If you're working like these are the cards I have available, you know that you have those cards available and you can do it. And say if it was even like those cards had numbers on them, it could be like, I know at a certain point I'm going to get a good number here because I've only drawn low numbers, whereas every single die roll is completely fresh, completely new. You should be, if the dice are good, there should be no sort of continuation of any sort of previous state to that. And again, if I misrepresented or you want more more clarification, feel free to ask the question again. So. And thank you, Brant, for running this. Okay, so Lionheart. Wow, it sounds familiar. The only sort of old 30-year-old chess-like medieval game I was thinking of was the old 3M Avalon Hill Feudal, which was like you had the pieces that moved around on the board, but it wasn't really a minis game. It was really more like a straight up sort of chess type game. Lionheart, huh? And I love checking out old games as well. So I have copies of Chainmail and so all sorts of other games.
Hey, folks, I'm popping in here real quick to offer a really big thanks to Mark for taking the time to do this. I'm glad you're able to do it early enough in the day that some of our folks over in Europe were able to pop in, because I know that's who several of the people in the chat are.
Great.
And so, yeah, it was nice that they were able to join us. I think because today is still a work day here in the U.S., that might have cost us a couple of us fellow Yankees, but it did manage to get a handful of our European brethren in the show, which is nice. Something I will say for the folks attending the ACDC. So those of you watching this 6 months later, this doesn't apply to you. But for the rest of you that are here for the ACDC, we do have a chat channel for this talk for the Create a Minis game in the Discord, that if y'all wanted to get in there and still continue exchanging some ideas and thoughts and comments and whatever, that text channel is there. There is the AV channel if y'all want to hop on and just talk to each other. Like, you're certainly welcome to do that. I don't know that Mark's got the ability to stick around and join you for that. I know I do not until later tonight. But that text channel is there, so folks are able to get in there and have all sorts of conversation and exchanges and ideas, and however you want to go. One question I did have for you, Mark, and I didn't type it out because I just now figured I'd throw it in looking at the time. We've still got a little bit of time to work with, but you've mentioned doing some minis agnostic stuff, or sort of reskinning games to match certain genres or properties or ideas that you wanted to tackle. How much of your particular minis game design or adaptation is built around I want to play that specific property, or I want to use these specific figures, versus, hey, I got a cool mechanical idea, let me figure that out, and I don't care what figures I use with it?
It's usually minis and genre driven. A good example is for me, almost any kind of game, minis game out there, I like to see if I can come up with a way to make it play Star Wars. So, because there's some very specific things, like like how you do the Force and how you do lightsabers, and like if I can do something, if it comes out of the box that way, that's fine. But if I can, then I'll be like, okay, I want to do something in Star Wars, so I do it for Space Weirdos. I'm like, Space Weirdos actually fits really well. They have some things, and so you can create something that feels like Star Wars with Space Weirdos pretty much out of the box. Song of Blades and Heroes, there were some very specific game mechanism, like special rules, basically just special rules that I felt like I constructed and needed to add to give it that Star Wars feel, and then it had it. So usually it's that first. The one that was different was that Ragnarok, which was like, wow. I was like, I got it. I can't remember where I got it. It was like one of those things where you could get like a package deal where you got the book and a bunch of the PDFs. And like I said, I looked at the rules and I was like, yeah, it's okay. It's good. But then there were there's two components, that runes and things like that were like, that's really cool. Now I want to see where I can put that in. So that was one example of the latter, but most of the time it's the former.
Yeah, we do have one last question in here for you, Mark. Sort of curious about your opinions on Tabletop Simulator.
So I think it's great. I know a lot of people who do it, and I think it's especially great if you're already comfortable with it and do it. It's a really good way to sort of get it out there, and maybe again find people that are not your group to do it. Building something for Tabletop Simulator has a lot of the same kind of benefits where you really have to understand this, but there's probably really understanding the components more than the rules. Really understand the components that you want to do. I'm a in-person guy, so if I'm doing stuff on my own, I'm like writing builders for games, and I'm doing this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I actually think things like Tabletop Simulator are great, and it's like I do run one online RPG. It's with my brother who lives in Philadelphia, so I never get to actually do it in person with him. So, yeah, so I think those are great, and I think that's really is. Do most people do that now instead of some of the what were the older ones like Vassal and stuff like that, or are people still doing Vassal?
I think it depends on what you're doing. I think for a lot of the traditional Hex and Counter board games, Vassal is still a pretty dominant force. Just because that's the one that's been around the longest, that's the one people are really comfortable with. And Vassal also does enforce rules for you in many cases, whereas Tabletop Simulator is a lot more of a sandbox. I will say on the minis front, there are a lot of folks futzing around with minis and Tabletop Simulator. And I was going to bring up for the audience and for anybody watching this, again, 6 months after the fact, over at the Dragoons, Jim Ozarski is the ringleader of the group, but we've got a gang of folks that are playing on Tabletop Simulator 3 or sometimes 4 nights a week. And usually it's minis games because it's very easy to do lots of minis stuff and scale them up quite a bit in Tabletop Simulator without having to do all the arts and crafts associated with minis wargaming, right? You're not having to worry about painting figures and building terrain and all that stuff. There's still work to do, but it's not as much work and it doesn't take over your dining room table. And so Jim's got a regular group of folks that includes people from the UK and Italy and Germany, as well as Canada. There's an occasional player jumps in from the Far East. There's guys everywhere from California to Newfoundland here in North America that all jump into those games on the regular. And what Jim does is they'll start the game in Tabletop Simulator and he'll just turn on the camera, the virtual camera, right? I think he's using OBS or whatever, but he'll just turn on the live stream and just let it go. So they're not specifically talking to the audience, although they'll interact with the chat some. They're basically, you're a fly on the wall watching their game as they're playing it. And those broadcasts will run anywhere from 2 to 4 hours at a time. And it may be that they're picking up a game that they started, last week, and now they're going to keep it going this week and then the next week. The long joked about epic game of Leipzig from back in 2019 took longer in real hours than the actual Battle of Leipzig did. It took them like 19 episodes to play it out. Jim jokes that every time I talk about it, I add some episodes, but it was in the teens at 3 hours a session for them to play out all of Leipzig. But you mentioned, adapting stuff to a different IP. They're busy morphing the Too Fat Lardy's skirmish rule set, I Ain't Been Shot, Mum, into the Star Wars universe. And Jim is actually writing about that on the front page of our site. So the first one of those posted this past Monday, and we'll get irregular updates from Jim and the gang as they're going through that. But you can watch them play those games out on Jim's YouTube channel. And those things are linked over on our site, so folks can watch from over there. So
great. Well, you
cool.
might get me interested. So
sure, I'm sure he'd love to have you. You're only 1 hour offset in the other direction because Jim's working out of Central Time.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, you can hop over on Ozarski's website or on his YouTube channel, and he's got 5 or 6 years worth of 2 to 3 nights a week tabletop simulator games all stashed there. And over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been almost exclusively mini stuff at this point, because that's what Jim has always loved doing the most. And that's very easy to do at large scales in TTS. So It's a lot easier to just copy and paste a regiment of Austrians than it is to have to sit there and paint another brick of them. So,
exactly.
So yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Look, we're trying something new. Theoretically, we have an outro video that should show up when I hit in stream here in just a second. We're going to find out whether or not you're going to get some cool, funky music or not. If not, this is just going to kind of stop dead, and I got to figure out what went wrong. But if it works, you've got some cool, funky outro music to live with. Hope people are enjoying the ACDC. We've got some more talks coming up tomorrow. And then we've got the welcome happy hour tonight with Gary. Probably a giveaway or two as a part of that show, or maybe we'll save the giveaways for the chit show tomorrow night. We'll have to see. But either way, Mark, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. And the rest of you guys will see you around the discords of the lobby of the convention. And hope you're enjoying the other games you're able to jump into and play. Thanks, people.